Hi there, and welcome to the Creative Operations Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Groom, and in this podcast, we'll be talking with creative operations leaders in all kinds of industries, from franchising to finance, from healthcare to hospitality and beyond. We'll be looking to uncover best practices and to see trends that are coming to help you keep your creative operations on brand and on budget at the same time. Enjoy. Well, hello, all my friends out there in the creative operations universe. I'm Kevin Groom. This is the Creative Operations Podcast 2.0. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, as you can see on screen, one-off design requests. If you are on a creative team of any size, you have probably seen this as one of those things that makes you just sigh a little bit as somebody shows up with a last-minute design request that forces you to drop everything you're doing and just get that one thing done. It's a stubborn problem. It's been around for as long as I've been in the creative operations business, and that's quite a few decades. And it is a problem that actually does have solutions. So I hope today we're going to do two things. We're going to talk about and dimensionalize the one-off design request problem from the company's perspective and from the local marketer's perspective, those folks out in the field who need something done quickly. And we're going to also try to ascertain the costs of that problem and point toward ways that we can either reduce or eliminate those costs. So that's our goal. We got about 20 minutes. We're going to try and do this in. No guests today, just me and this little presentation I put together for you guys. But I hope you'll end up with some practical answers to a very stubborn problem. So let's talk about the true cost of one-off design requests. As you can see in this graphic, I've depicted these as an iceberg in which visible to us above the waterline, if you will, are two very clear and very measurable cost factors. One is studio time. That is the amount of time that a graphic arts design professional needs to spend to fulfill a design request and deliver a quality file. That can be measured sometimes in a very brief period of time, an hour, 2 hours, sometimes less than an hour. But then there's a second thing, and that is what I call workflow time, which is all the trafficking efforts, the emails back and forth, the approvals that often have to happen within the agency operation itself. That workflow time, at least in our experience, can double and sometimes even triple the time that is spent on a file in InDesign or Illustrator or what have you. And those two things, though, are clearly and easily measurable, because if there's one thing I think that creative operations has gotten good at over the years, well, not just one thing, but one significant thing, is tracking and making more efficient their response. So timekeeping should give you the data on this. That's the good news. The more challenging news is that below the waterline, there are all kinds of costs that are imposed on the organization by one-off design requests that aren't so easy to measure as minutes that can be translated into dollars. So let's talk about those things because they can be big. First, disruption. Most in-house agency leaders will create a workflow in their creative operation that is really designed to maximize the impact, the creative impact and the strategic impact of their team. And so they want them focused on big business building projects, efforts, and initiatives. But when a one-off design request comes in, it's like throwing a wrench in the works in that carefully machined workflow and that carefully developed agency culture is all of a sudden upended. And so we begin to see frustration creep in. We begin to see inefficiencies creep in. And those things are difficult to measure because even though the wrench itself might be small, the works that it upended are delicate. Second point, turnaround time. Within those carefully machined operations, most in-house agency leaders will have established rules about what it takes for a project to flow through the system, to flow from concept to completion. One-off design requests, though, often don't really fit well with that carefully machined workflow. And so the turnaround time from the local marketer's perspective can seem quite large, and it can actually create a perception that the agency is not responsive, but is instead bureaucratic. So this notion of turnaround time imposes costs not just in local marketer satisfaction, but what I would call a reputational load or burden as well. Third thing, and this is one of the factors that we have focused on at Pike & Nine from the very beginning, and that is brand consistency. When a local marketer has been frustrated by the turnaround time associated with a one-off design request, he or she may very well be prompted to go rogue, to try and execute this tactic or this initiative on their own using local resources or perhaps no resources at all. We've seen the full gamut of these kinds of experiments. And so what suffers when that occurs is executions in the marketplace that don't support the strategy, don't support the brand look and feel, don't support the promise that the brand is trying to make to its customers. And even worse than the fact that it's inconsistent with the brand is that execution is often invisible to the brand. And so erosion is occurring without your ever knowing it. It's as if you've built your brand near a beach, and the beach on which you built your brand is beginning to fade away under your own feet. The fourth thing, and this is what we might call a knock-on or second-order effect, but it's a real cost. When in-house creative operations are focused most on responding to mechanical one-off design requests rather than building the brand and moving the business forward in a real and measurable way, you end up with greater staff churn. And particularly in the aftermath of the Great Resignation, we know that staff churn, loss of institutional memory, is far more than just a recruiting fee or the cost to advertise for and interview for a position on your team. You lose intellectual weight, heft, and momentum when churn starts to rise. And operations that are focused on one-off design requests often experience the greatest staff churn. And then finally, the last one, and again, kind of a knock-on effect. Once a reputation has been developed that the in-house creative operation doesn't respond to design requests in a timely fashion, the local marketer's loyalty to that operation and likelihood of using that team for their work begins to go down. And you end up with a cycle, what we think of as a vicious cycle of what we call local marketing chaos. So those are all the costs of a one-off design request. And in a study that we did several years ago, we tried to put a number to it. Well, this was in a work that we did with a community of more than 7,000 local marketers and an annual volume of more than 18,000 design requests. And the number you see here on screen, $800, is the number that we agreed to with our client counterparts who had decided that this was a fair economic estimate. And we think it's a number that could be applied across many different operations. And that's a big number. If you multiplied 800 times 18,000, you get to a very large multi-million-dollar number indeed. So, just as a real quick summary, the most troubling aspect of one-off design requests is that they can take in-house creative operations that have worked, sometimes for years, to become strategic partners to the business and force them back into a role of being a get-it-done shop. And that's a place most folks, at least most creative folks, don't really want to be. So solving this nagging problem, this stubborn problem, is something that should receive a good degree of priority. Often doesn't, precisely because those costs seem to be so much hidden below the waterline. Here's the good news. There are some ways to grab this bull by the horns and begin to wrestle it so it's under control. Let's start with 3. First, as an in-house agency, it would be extremely useful to develop a simple form crafted in the language that a local marketer can understand and that's designed specifically for those simple one-off requests. Let me pause on that. We've got an example up here from one of our systems. This is actually one of our demo systems. And you can just see in these fields that we're trying to keep the questions simple, not jargony, and to make sure that they require the local marketer to provide an unambiguous answer. When you get your creative services intake form done right, and it may take more than one iteration to get there, but when you get there, here's what happens. You can eliminate multiple rounds of revision and review. You can eliminate long calls to clarify the details of a project and all the lag time and the invitation time and the calendaring time that goes with those things. You can make substantial progress in improving your response to one-off design requests simply by using a creative intake form that's designed with local marketers, not graphics and marketing professionals, in mind. So that's job number one. Solution number two. Use your turnaround time in your processes to enforce a desire to get one-off design requests done in one and done, if at all possible, and 2 revisions, no more. And the way to do that is actually, if you look at this chart, use kind of what the mathematicians would call a logarithmic approach. For each additional round of revision and review that's required beyond the first, the amount of turnaround time that you impose should double or more. Now, let me pause and say, because I understand the politics that are involved here, you shouldn't implement a rule like this without knowing that you've got backing from up top. Your leadership needs to know that you have fully assessed the cost of one-off design requests, and they need to be on board with the fact that you've recognized and they recognize just how big those costs are. If you've got their support, then you can use this kind of a logarithmic approach to reduce the number of times jobs run through the shop again and again. You can enforce through your intake form, and with this approach to turnaround time on multiple rounds, you can enforce more care from your local marketers in submitting their one-off design requests in the first place. And then the third idea. It's as simple as a word we all know well, templates. To build a library of self-service brand templates so that now that we've got our one-off design requests smaller in number, clearer in form, and reduced in terms of the number of times they come back through the shop, now our job is to try and eliminate as many of those design requests as we possibly can. And that is what we created Pike & Ein and Campaign Drive for in the very first place, so that we can take those 18,000 design requests that we saw in that client community and get that number down at this point. And this has been a 10-year journey, but we've got that design request down about 90%. So you take your one-off design request job, you reduce it in size, complexity, and bureaucracy by about half, and then you reduce its frequency by about 90%, and you will save yourself an enormous amount of cost. If you'd like to learn more about how we do this and how our clients have been doing this, we'd love to get together and show you in the real world. And to do that, you can come to pikeandein.com and register for a brand lab. Here's what that is. It's an opportunity for you to use the platform to create your own creative services request form, tailored to the needs of your local marketing community, and to actually use it in the real world. See how it works for you, for your in-house team, and for your local marketers. And then, if that creative intake form works well, begin to look for ways to use self-service brand templates to eliminate as many of those one-off design requests as you can. So that's our story today. Hopefully it was helpful, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Creative Operations Podcast 2.0. Thanks.